The city knew him as a successful man. People often looked at his big house, the expensive cars in his driveway, and the staff that worked for him, and they whispered about how lucky he must be. Many respected him for his business skills, some envied his lifestyle, and others wished they could trade places with him. To the outside world, he seemed to have everything anyone could ever want. But inside his heart, he carried a pain that no amount of money could heal. His name was Mr. Harrison, and despite all the wealth and recognition he had earned over the years, there was always something missing in his life. That missing piece was tied to his only son, Daniel. Daniel had once been a lively, energetic boy. He loved running in the park, riding his small bicycle, and playing ball with the neighborhood children. Mr. Harrison remembered those days with both joy and sorrow, because they were short-lived. When Daniel was very young, an accident changed everything. From that day forward, Daniel could no longer walk. He would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. For a father, there is no pain deeper than seeing his child suffer. Mr. Harrison had faced many challenges in his business career, but none of them hurt as much as watching his son struggle to do the things other children did so easily. The accident had not only taken Daniel's ability to walk, it had also stolen a part of his confidence. As Daniel grew older, he became quieter. The cheerful boy who once laughed easily now often sat in silence, looking out of his window or reading books by himself. Children who used to play with him slowly drifted away. At school, many classmates treated him kindly on the surface, but deep down he could sense that they did not really know how to connect with him. Some looked at his wheelchair before they looked at his face. Some spoke to him with unnecessary pity, which made him feel more different than he already did. And some, unfortunately, avoided him altogether. Mr. Harrison tried to fill this emptiness in his son's life. He bought Daniel books, games, and even the newest technology, hoping it would bring him joy. But gifts could not replace the warmth of companionship. Daniel wanted what every young person wants: friends who understood him, people who cared, and one day, perhaps, someone who could love him for who he was. The father noticed something else as his son became a young man. Whenever conversations turned toward relationships, Daniel became uncomfortable. He would change the subject, or force a smile to hide the sadness in his eyes. Mr. Harrison knew why. Daniel feared that no girl would ever look beyond his wheelchair to see the kind, intelligent, and gentle soul inside him. This thought broke the father's heart. In business meetings, he could negotiate fearlessly with powerful men. In courtrooms, he could defend his rights with confidence. But when it came to his son's loneliness, he felt helpless. No wealth, no influence, and no connections could buy the one thing Daniel needed most: true love and acceptance. At night, Mr. Harrison often sat alone in his study. He would glance at the framed photographs of Daniel as a child, laughing, running, holding his hand at the park. Then he would look at the present reality, his son, sitting quietly in the living room, eyes fixed on a television show but not truly watching. The contrast tore him apart. The father thought to himself, "I would give up all my riches if I could take away his pain. If I could give him even one day of feeling normal again, I would trade everything." But he knew such wishes could not change the truth. Still, Mr. Harrison was not the type of man who gave up easily. If life placed a wall in front of him, he always searched for a door, and if he found no door, he built one himself. This spirit had made him a millionaire, and he believed it could also help him solve the problem that weighed on his heart. He started thinking, what if he could create a chance for his son to meet people in a setting where kindness and character would shine more than appearance? What if Daniel could meet someone who saw him as a person, not just a boy in a wheelchair? It was not an easy thought. The father was protective, and he worried about rejection hurting his son even more. He knew Daniel's heart was gentle, and any unkind gesture could cut deeply. Yet he also knew that keeping him hidden away from the world would not help either. Daniel needed to experience life. He deserved the opportunity to be treated just like anyone else. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became. Mr. Harrison decided he would take action. He could not control who would truly care for his son, but he could at least open the door for possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, there was someone out there who would see Daniel's smile before noticing his wheelchair. And so, the plan began to take shape. Mr. Harrison would quietly invite a few young women for what he called a special evening. He would not tell them much in advance. He would simply explain that they were being invited to meet someone dear to him. His hope was that their first impression, their unprepared reaction, would reveal their true hearts. As he prepared, he thought back on all the times people had overlooked Daniel. He remembered the birthday parties where some children didn't show up because they felt uncomfortable. He remembered the whispers he overheard when he pushed his son's wheelchair through a crowded place. He remembered the way certain parents pulled their children aside, telling them not to stare. All these memories fueled his determination. This was not about pity. This was about dignity. His son deserved to be seen, not for his wheelchair, but for his heart, his mind, and his soul. Daniel, of course, did not yet know about his father's plan. To him, life continued as usual, reading, studying, and spending quiet evenings at home. He did not suspect that his father was carefully arranging something that could change everything. But in Mr. Harrison's mind, the picture was clear. If even one person came and treated Daniel with genuine warmth, it would be worth it. If even one person looked at him with respect, with kindness, and with sincerity, it could give Daniel hope again. The father had no illusions. He knew the evening might end in disappointment. Yet he also believed in miracles, and he knew that sometimes, even the smallest act of kindness could change a life forever. And so, with hope in his heart, he continued preparing for that day, unaware that the most unexpected gesture was waiting just around the corner. Mr. Harrison could not sleep that night. His mind was busy, filled with thoughts of how he would carry out the plan he had made in his heart. The more he thought about it, the more serious he became. He knew this was not a business deal where profit and loss could be measured on paper. This was about his son's life, his happiness, and perhaps even his future. When the morning sun rose, he was already at his desk, writing notes, making calls, and carefully thinking of every detail. He wanted the evening to be perfect, not luxurious or showy, but warm and honest. He told himself again and again that money could not buy love, but it could create an opportunity for people to meet. And that was all he wanted: to open a door for his son. First, he thought about the place. He did not want it to be too formal, because that might make Daniel nervous. He also did not want it to be too casual, because he wanted the meeting to carry some importance. After hours of thinking, he decided it would be best to hold the gathering in his own home. That way, Daniel would feel safe and comfortable, and the guests would get a chance to meet him in his true environment. The dining room was large and beautifully decorated, with a long wooden table and soft lighting. Mr. Harrison asked the staff to prepare a meal that was simple but welcoming. He told them not to overdo it. He did not want the guests to feel as if they were being impressed by wealth. He wanted them to feel as though they had come into a home filled with warmth and sincerity. Next, he thought about who should come. This was the most difficult part. He did not want to invite people who would treat the evening like an opportunity for gain, simply because he was wealthy. He did not want anyone who would pretend to be kind while secretly judging his son. He wanted genuine hearts, people who might truly care. So he began speaking with a few trusted friends. He asked them if they knew young women with good character, kindness, and respect for others. He did not say much about his son's condition at first. He only explained that he was arranging a special evening and wanted to invite those who carried sincerity in their hearts. At first, some of his friends were puzzled, but they trusted him and gave him names. Slowly, a list began to form. There were young women from different backgrounds, some students, some working, some from well-known families, and some from ordinary ones. Each was known, in one way or another, for being thoughtful and considerate. After much thought, Mr. Harrison selected a small number. He decided not to invite too many, because he did not want it to feel like an event. He wanted it to feel personal, almost like family. The next step was to reach out. He sent polite invitations, explaining only that it would be an evening to meet someone very important to him. He wrote in such a way that the message carried respect and dignity. He left out all details about Daniel, because he wanted the first impression to be natural and real. As the days passed, his plan slowly became reality. The dining room was prepared, the food menu finalized, and the invitations accepted. Each young woman had responded with curiosity and politeness, agreeing to come. During all of this, Mr. Harrison kept the secret from Daniel. He watched his son go about his daily routine, reading, studying, quietly spending time in the garden, and he longed to tell him what was coming. But he decided it was better to wait. He did not want Daniel to overthink or become anxious before the evening. He wanted him to meet the guests naturally, without carrying the weight of expectation. At times, he felt a little nervous himself. What if no one showed kindness? What if the evening ended with disappointment? The thought made his heart heavy. Yet, he also reminded himself that he had to try. Even if only one person out of the group showed true warmth, it would make all the effort worthwhile. The night before the gathering, he sat beside his son in the living room. Daniel was reading a book, as usual. Mr. Harrison looked at him quietly for a while, studying his calm face, the way his eyes moved across the page, the way his hands gently turned each sheet. He felt a deep love for his son and, at the same time, a deep sadness. Finally, he spoke softly. "Daniel, tomorrow evening, I would like you to join me for dinner. I've invited a few guests. They're coming to meet us, and I think it will be a pleasant evening." Daniel looked up, slightly surprised. It was rare for his father to invite people home for dinner unless it was related to business. "Guests?" he asked slowly. "Yes," his father replied, smiling gently. "Not business guests. Just people I thought you might enjoy meeting." Daniel gave a small nod. He did not ask many questions. He trusted his father, and though he was curious, he did not press for more information. Deep inside, however, a quiet nervousness began to stir in him. He was not used to meeting new people in such a setting. The following day passed quickly. The staff worked quietly, arranging flowers, setting the table, and preparing the food. Mr. Harrison moved about, checking every detail, making sure everything was perfect but not overwhelming. He wanted the evening to feel like a gathering of friends, not a show of wealth. As the sun began to set, Daniel dressed neatly, as his father had asked. He wore a simple but well-fitted shirt and trousers, looking both handsome and gentle. His father, seeing him ready, felt a swell of pride. To him, Daniel was always the most remarkable person in the room, even if others failed to see it. Soon, the doorbell rang. The first guest had arrived. Mr. Harrison welcomed her with warmth, guiding her into the dining room. She smiled politely, curious but unsure of what to expect. One by one, the others arrived. The room slowly filled with quiet chatter and the sound of footsteps. Each young woman carried her own thoughts, wondering who they were about to meet, why they had been invited, and what made this evening special. Meanwhile, Daniel sat near the window, waiting. His heart beat a little faster than usual. He wondered who these people were and why his father had invited them. He felt a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. Part of him wanted to retreat into the safety of his room, but another part of him longed to see what the evening would bring. Mr. Harrison moved around the room with calmness, greeting the guests, making sure they felt at ease. He glanced at his son, noticing the quiet tension in his posture. He walked over, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "Just be yourself, Daniel. That's all you need to do." Daniel nodded slightly, taking a slow breath. His father's words gave him a little strength. He looked toward the group of young women, waiting for the moment when introductions would begin. The stage was set. The father's plan, carefully built over many days, was finally in motion. What would happen next, he did not know. But in his heart, he carried hope that somewhere in that room, a spark of true kindness was waiting to be discovered. The evening slowly unfolded as the guests settled in. The long dining table looked inviting, with plates neatly arranged, glasses shining under the soft lights, and the gentle fragrance of flowers filling the air. Yet, in Daniel's heart, the atmosphere felt heavier than it appeared. He sat quietly in his wheelchair, positioned near the table, watching the guests with cautious eyes. One by one, the young women greeted Mr. Harrison politely. Some gave a bright smile, others looked around the room curiously, and a few exchanged quick glances with one another as if trying to understand what made this dinner so unusual. Their eyes eventually shifted toward Daniel, and in those first brief moments, everything the father had worried about seemed to appear. The first girl walked over, her smile warm but slightly uncertain. She leaned down politely to shake Daniel's hand, saying, "It's nice to meet you." Her voice was kind, yet Daniel noticed how her eyes flickered for just a moment to his wheelchair before returning to his face. It was a small detail, but for Daniel, it was familiar. He had seen that look many times before, the quick reminder in someone's mind that he was different. Another guest joined in soon after, speaking cheerfully about the lovely house and how welcoming everything felt. She complimented the decorations, the flowers on the table, even the food's aroma. But when she turned to Daniel, her tone grew softer, almost too soft, as if she thought he was fragile. She asked, "Do you enjoy reading? Or do you like watching movies?" Her questions were kind, but they carried a layer of pity he could sense. Daniel answered politely, smiling faintly, but deep inside, a quiet sadness touched him. He did not want to be pitied, he wanted to be treated like any other young man. As more guests interacted with him, Daniel began to feel a mixture of emotions. Some spoke to him kindly but quickly shifted their attention back to his father. Others tried to engage in small talk but seemed uncomfortable, their words stopping after a few sentences as if they did not know what to say. He could almost hear the hesitation in their voices, as though they were unsure how to behave around him. Mr. Harrison observed everything closely. His heart felt heavy as he noticed the subtle signs, the nervous glances, the careful tone of voice, the way some guests stood a little farther from Daniel than they might have if he were not in a wheelchair. None of them were openly unkind, but none seemed to see beyond the chair either. The meal was served, and the room filled with the soft clinking of cutlery and the polite sound of conversation. The young women spoke to one another about their studies, their work, and their hobbies. Laughter occasionally rose at one end of the table, and compliments were exchanged. Daniel listened quietly, adding a few words when someone spoke directly to him, but most of the time, he remained in the background. There was a moment when one of the guests tried to include him in the conversation. She asked about his favorite subjects in school. Daniel responded thoughtfully, speaking about his love for history and literature. For a few minutes, the table grew quiet as he shared something he had read recently that inspired him. His voice was calm, steady, and intelligent. A few guests listened politely, nodding, but soon, the conversation drifted away again, returning to topics that did not involve him. Mr. Harrison noticed how Daniel's eyes lowered slightly after that, how he focused on his plate instead of the group. He knew his son well enough to see the emotions hidden behind his calm expression. Daniel was used to being overlooked, but it still hurt. The father's chest tightened with silent pain. This was exactly what he had feared, the polite distance, the invisible wall that people often placed between themselves and his son. Still, he reminded himself that the evening was not over. Perhaps something could change. Perhaps one person would see what he saw: a young man with a brilliant mind, a gentle heart, and quiet strength. As the evening continued, Daniel grew a little quieter. He smiled when needed, responded when spoken to, but his heart was slowly retreating into its safe place, where he no longer expected much. He had learned long ago not to hope too strongly when it came to making connections. Hope, after all, made disappointment sharper. But for Mr. Harrison, every second mattered. He walked around the room, keeping the conversation flowing, asking the guests questions, making sure they felt welcome. All the while, his eyes returned again and again to his son. He prayed silently in his heart that anyone would step forward and break the pattern. The evening reached a point where the polite introductions and casual talk had been made, and now it was clear which guests were truly engaged and which were simply being courteous. Some of the young women were kind but distant. Others tried for a while but eventually seemed unsure of how to connect with Daniel. One girl even spent more time speaking with the staff than with him. And then, quietly, something different happened. The sound of the doorbell echoed again. Another guest had arrived a little later than the rest. She stepped into the room carrying something small in her hand. The soft light of the chandelier reflected gently off the object. It was a fresh flower. As she entered, she looked around the room with a calm smile, her eyes warm and bright. But unlike the others, she did not walk first to Mr. Harrison, who stood by the door waiting to greet her. Instead, she glanced toward the table, where Daniel sat. Her eyes softened even more as she walked directly toward him. The room grew unusually quiet as everyone watched. She stopped in front of Daniel, bent down slightly so that her eyes were level with his, and held out the flower. "This is for you," she said softly, her smile carrying a warmth that reached her eyes. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the flower. His lips parted as though to speak, but for a moment, no words came. He looked at her, almost unable to believe that her first thought upon entering the room had been to acknowledge him, not his wheelchair, not his father, not the surroundings, but him. In that moment, something shifted. The air in the room, which had been filled with polite distance, now carried a different energy. The guests looked on silently, perhaps surprised, perhaps reflective. Mr. Harrison felt his eyes grow moist, though he quickly blinked to hide it. For years, he had waited for someone to see his son the way he saw him. And here was a young woman, unknown until now, who had done exactly that in a single, simple gesture. Daniel looked down at the flower resting in his hands. For the first time that evening, a genuine smile spread across his face, a smile not forced for politeness, but born from a spark of joy. The evening was not yet over, but already, something important had changed. One flower, one act of kindness, had opened a door that words alone had not been able to unlock. For a long moment, the room seemed to pause. The other guests watched quietly as Daniel held the flower in his hand. He turned it gently between his fingers, almost as if he was afraid it might vanish if he touched it too firmly. His eyes lifted slowly to meet the girl's, and he saw nothing but kindness reflected there. Her name was Emily. She had not come dressed in an extravagant gown, nor did she try to impress with jewelry or makeup. She looked simple, yet graceful. But it was not her appearance that set her apart, it was the natural warmth in her presence. From the instant she walked in, she had chosen not to see a wheelchair, not to see a limitation, but to see the person sitting before her. "Thank you," Daniel finally managed to whisper, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. He smiled in a way that surprised even himself. It was not the polite smile he had been giving all evening, it was real, filled with a sudden light that had not been there before. Emily's smile grew as she took a seat next to him at the table. She did not hesitate or glance around as though searching for permission. She simply sat beside him as if it was the most natural thing in the world. For Daniel, this small act meant everything. Others had spoken to him during the evening, but none had chosen to sit so close, as though they belonged at his side. The conversation slowly began again around the table, but now, something was different. Emily leaned toward Daniel, asking him about his interests. "Do you enjoy reading?" she asked, her eyes curious rather than pitying. Daniel nodded, his fingers still holding the flower carefully. "Yes, very much. I love history and stories from the past. I like to imagine how people lived, what choices they made, and what lessons we can learn from them." Her eyes brightened. "That's wonderful. I enjoy reading too. I've always loved poetry and stories that carry meaning. Do you have a favorite book?" The question was simple, but the way she asked it made Daniel feel valued. She was not filling silence out of politeness, she genuinely wanted to know his thoughts. Slowly, his words began to flow more freely. He spoke about his favorite authors, the books that had touched his heart, and even a few quotes that inspired him. Emily listened carefully, nodding, sometimes smiling, sometimes asking gentle questions that encouraged him to share more. Mr. Harrison sat at the far end of the table, watching the exchange. His heart filled with emotions he could hardly contain. For years, he had seen his son fade quietly into the background whenever people gathered. For years, he had prayed someone would notice the boy he knew so well, the boy with sharp intelligence, deep thoughts, and a soul full of kindness. And now, in front of his eyes, it was happening. The other guests noticed it too. Some looked surprised, others thoughtful. They had all spoken to Daniel earlier, but none had reached him the way Emily had in only a few minutes. She did not try too hard. She did not act differently. She simply treated him as she would treat any other person she wished to know. And that, more than anything, touched Daniel deeply. As the evening moved on, Emily's presence changed the mood at the table. Daniel laughed softly once or twice, and when he did, the sound was genuine. Even Mr. Harrison, who had almost forgotten what it felt like to hear his son laugh freely, felt a lump rise in his throat. He quickly raised his glass of water, pretending to take a sip so no one would see the moisture in his eyes. At one point, Emily noticed the piano in the corner of the room. She turned to Daniel and asked, "Do you play?" Daniel shook his head with a shy smile. "No, but I love music. Sometimes I listen to it when I'm reading. It makes me feel as if the words come alive." Her face lit up. "I play a little. Would you like me to?" Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, I would," he said softly, almost hesitant, as though afraid she might change her mind. Without waiting for anyone's approval, Emily stood and walked to the piano. She sat gracefully, her fingers finding the keys with ease. A gentle melody filled the room, soft and calming, weaving through the air like a quiet conversation. The sound seemed to wrap around Daniel's heart, lifting it in a way he had not felt in a long time. As she played, Emily glanced at him once, her smile reassuring, as though the music was meant especially for him. Daniel sat still, the flower resting carefully in his lap, and felt something stir inside him, something that had been silent for years. It was hope, fragile but alive. The room grew silent as everyone listened. For those few minutes, it was as if the evening belonged only to Emily and Daniel. The other guests faded into the background. Even Mr. Harrison, sitting with his hands clasped tightly together, felt as though time had stopped. When the music ended, Daniel clapped softly, his face glowing. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Emily returned to her seat beside him, smiling gently. "I'm glad you liked it." For the rest of the evening, Daniel spoke more than he had in a long time. He shared stories, thoughts, and dreams. Emily listened with genuine interest, and in return, she spoke about her own life, her studies, and the little things that made her happy. Their conversation flowed naturally, like two friends who had known each other longer than a single evening. Mr. Harrison watched, and though he remained silent, his heart spoke loudly within him. He saw not just a flower, not just music, but the beginning of something deeper, something he had longed for his son to experience. The other guests began to notice that the evening was gently shifting around Emily and Daniel. Some continued to chat among themselves, but others watched with quiet respect. It was clear that something meaningful was taking place, something beyond the polite surface of a dinner gathering. When the night grew late and the guests slowly began to leave, Emily remained by Daniel's side until the very end. She did not rush, nor did she act as though she was fulfilling a duty. She stayed because she wanted to. Before she left, she turned to Daniel once more. "Thank you for tonight. I enjoyed our conversation very much. And remember," she added with a small smile, pointing to the flower, "that's yours. Keep it." Daniel looked at her, his eyes shining. "Thank you," he whispered again, the words carrying more weight than anyone could measure. As the door closed behind her, the house grew quiet. Daniel sat still, holding the flower as though it were the most precious thing in the world. His father approached slowly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did well tonight, son," Mr. Harrison said softly. "I'm proud of you." Daniel turned his head, his eyes moist but filled with something new. "Father, she gave me this flower first. No one has ever done that before." Mr. Harrison nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He understood what that single gesture meant. It was not the flower itself but the heart behind it. In that moment, both father and son realized that hope was not lost. Kindness could appear when least expected, and even a single flower could light up the darkest corners of the soul. The house was quiet after the last guest had left. The dishes had been cleared, the candles blown out, and the staff moved silently through the rooms, tidying up after the evening. But in the dining hall, Daniel remained seated, still holding the flower Emily had placed in his lap. He turned it gently in his hands, studying its petals as if it were the most valuable thing he had ever been given. Mr. Harrison stood nearby, his heart so full he could barely speak. He had arranged the evening with hope but also with fear. He had worried that none of the guests would see beyond Daniel's wheelchair. He had feared that his son would once again be left sitting in silence, invisible in a room full of people. Yet tonight, something different had happened. Emily had arrived, and with one simple gesture, she had changed everything. For a long time, the father said nothing. He simply watched Daniel, noticing the way his son's face was glowing with quiet happiness. Finally, he walked closer and sat beside him. "Did you enjoy the evening?" he asked softly. Daniel looked up, his eyes still bright. "Yes, father," he whispered. Then, after a pause, he added, "but mostly because of her." Mr. Harrison's throat tightened. He knew which her Daniel meant. The image of Emily walking straight to his son, placing the flower on his lap, and smiling at him with such warmth replayed in his mind again and again. It was not the kind of act that could be planned or forced. It had come naturally, from a heart that carried genuine kindness. "I saw the way she treated you," Mr. Harrison said gently. "She saw you for who you are. That is all I have ever wanted, for someone to see you as I do." Daniel lowered his gaze, staring at the flower again. His hands trembled slightly as he held it. "Father, no one has ever done that before. Everyone always sees the chair first. But she didn't." Tears welled in Mr. Harrison's eyes, though he tried to keep his voice steady. "Yes, son. That is why tonight is special. It was not just a dinner. It was a sign that kindness exists, even when we least expect it." The room grew quiet again, the weight of the moment pressing gently around them. For years, Daniel had lived with the silent burden of being different, of being overlooked. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, he felt what it was like to be noticed, not because of pity, but because of genuine care. As the night stretched on, Daniel refused to set the flower aside. He placed it carefully on his bedside table when he finally retired to his room. Long after the lights were turned off, he lay awake, staring at it in the moonlight. His mind replayed the way Emily had looked at him, the way she had sat beside him without hesitation, the way she had played the piano as though the music was meant for him alone. Mr. Harrison, too, could not sleep easily. He sat in his study, the events of the evening running through his mind. For years, he had carried the silent fear that his son might live his whole life without experiencing true companionship. Tonight had shown him that perhaps his fears did not have to come true. The next morning, Daniel wheeled himself into the breakfast room, the flower resting carefully on his lap. Mr. Harrison looked at it and smiled softly. "You kept it," he said. "Of course," Daniel replied. "It means more to me than anyone could understand." The father's heart swelled with quiet gratitude. He knew this was not just about a flower. It was about hope, the kind of hope that could carry a person forward, even through the hardest days. In the days that followed, Daniel spoke of Emily often. Not constantly, but in small moments, a remark about her smile, a memory of the way she listened, a quiet mention of the melody she had played on the piano. Each time, Mr. Harrison listened with patience, feeling joy rise within him. His son's words carried life, energy, and a spark he had not seen in years. It was not clear what the future would hold. Emily had only just met Daniel. One evening could not decide everything. But it had shown them something important, that kindness could break barriers, that understanding could bring comfort, and that even the smallest gesture, a single flower, could carry a weight greater than gold. Weeks later, Mr. Harrison sat once again in his study. On his desk lay his usual business papers, contracts, and letters, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He thought of Daniel, who had begun spending more time in the garden, his book always accompanied by the same flower pressed carefully inside its pages. He thought of Emily, whose smile had left such a lasting impression. And he thought of himself, a man who had spent years building wealth only to discover that true riches were measured not in money, but in moments like these. He realized something that night: all the cars, the house, the luxuries, they mattered little compared to the look on his son's face when he received that flower. That single expression of joy was worth more than everything he owned. Sometimes, late at night, Mr. Harrison would sit quietly and imagine the future. He did not know if Emily and Daniel would remain in touch, or if life would lead them in different directions. But what mattered was that for the first time, Daniel had felt the possibility of love and friendship in a way he had never known before. And for Mr. Harrison, that was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with colors of gold and red, Daniel and his father sat together in the garden. The flower, though now pressed and a little faded, rested carefully in Daniel's lap. He touched it gently and smiled. "Father," he said quietly, "I don't know what will happen in the future. But for the first time, I believe something good can happen. I believe I can be seen." Mr. Harrison turned to him, his eyes soft with tears he did not try to hide. "Yes, my son," he whispered. "You can. You already have been." The garden was filled with the sound of evening birds, the rustle of leaves, and the quiet heartbeat of hope. The father closed his eyes for a moment, thanking silently for the gift that had been given. It had not been a grand act, nor a dramatic moment. It had been a simple flower, offered with kindness, given without expectation. Yet it had carried the power to heal, to open hearts, and to bring light where there had once been only silence. That night, when Daniel placed the flower back on his bedside table, he looked at it once more before falling asleep. His lips curved into a soft smile, and for the first time in years, his dreams were filled not with loneliness, but with warmth. And in the room next door, his father sat quietly, tears rolling down his cheeks, not tears of sorrow this time, but tears of gratitude. He had witnessed something he thought might never come. He had seen his son receive the gift of being noticed, being valued, being loved. One flower had changed everything.